Story number 1. The city of Dallas was a bustling metropolis filled with life and energy. But amidst the towering skyscrapers and vibrant streets, there existed a hidden darkness, a lurking evil that preyed on the unsuspecting. One such victim was James Davis, an unassuming accountant who worked late at night in a small, nondescript office building. As the city outside hummed with activity, James toiled away, oblivious to the horror that awaited him. The night was quiet, the only sound the rhythmic tapping of James's fingers on the keyboard. Suddenly, a strange noise pierced the silence, a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from the depths of the building. James froze, his heart pounding in his chest. The growl came again, closer this time, and he could sense a presence lurking in the shadows. He tried to convince himself it was just his imagination, but the feeling of dread grew stronger. Cautiously, James made his way down to the ground floor, his hand trembling as he reached for the light switch. The hallway was bathed in an eerie glow, the shadows dancing ominously on the walls. He followed the sound of the growls to the storage room, a dusty, forgotten space filled with old boxes and files. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a scene that sent a chill down James's spine. In the middle of the room, a shadowy figure stood hunched over a table, its back to James. The figure was tall and thin, its long, bony fingers tracing intricate patterns on the surface of the table. James couldn't make out the figure's face, but he could feel an aura of evil emanating from it, a palpable darkness that threatened to consume him. He took a step back, his breath caught in his throat. The figure suddenly turned around, revealing a face that would forever haunt James's nightmares. It was a skull, its eye sockets empty, and its teeth bared in a grotesque grin. James let out a scream and stumbled back, knocking over a stack of boxes. The skull chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that echoed through the room like the rattling of bones. James turned to run, but the skull was too fast. It lunged at him, its bony fingers digging into his flesh. James cried out in pain as he was dragged back to the table. The skull pressed its face against his, its cold breath washing over him. He could feel its energy seeping into his body, draining him of his life force. James tried to fight back, but his limbs were weak and unresponsive. The skull's grin widened as it relished James's terror, its eyes glowing with an eerie, malevolent light. James's vision began to blur, and his consciousness faded. He could feel his soul slipping away, consumed by the darkness that had invaded his world. As the last vestiges of life left his body, the skull let out a final, triumphant laugh. It then turned away from James and resumed its strange ritual, its bony fingers dancing over the table, weaving patterns of darkness and despair. The door to the storage room slammed shut, plunging the room into darkness. James was gone, his spirit trapped in the shadows, forever haunted by the horror he had witnessed. The next morning, James's body was found by his co-workers. They couldn't explain what had happened to him, but they could sense an evil presence in the building, a lingering darkness that refused to dissipate. The firm was closed down shortly after, and the building was left abandoned. It became a symbol of terror in Dallas, a place where nightmares came to life. And the skull, the source of all the horror, continued to haunt the shadows, waiting for its next victim, its empty eyes burning with an insatiable hunger for darkness. Story number 2. Robert Moore was a creature of habit. He liked his life to be predictable, organized, and routine. That's why he had been working the late shift at the same gas station in San Jose for the past 5 years. The job was boring, but it was steady and reliable, and it allowed him to live his quiet, unassuming life. One night, as Robert was closing up the gas station, he noticed a strange light flickering in the distance. It was coming from the woods behind the gas station. Curiosity piqued, Robert decided to investigate. He grabbed a flashlight and headed out into the night. As he walked closer to the light, Robert could make out the shape of a large, abandoned house. The windows were boarded up, and the paint was peeling off the walls. It looked like something out of a horror movie. Robert hesitated for a moment, but his curiosity got the better of him. He slowly approached the house and peered through a crack in the boards covering one of the windows. Inside the house, Robert could see a shadowy figure moving around. It was tall and thin, with long, spindly limbs. Robert's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the figure glide through the darkness. Suddenly, the figure turned and looked directly at Robert. Its eyes glowed red, and its mouth curled into a wicked grin. Robert gasped and stumbled back, knocking over a trash can in the process. The figure let out a piercing shriek and lunged towards the window. Robert turned and ran, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't dare look back. Robert ran until he could no longer run. He collapsed on the ground, his lungs burning. He lay there for a long time, catching his breath. When he finally had the strength to get up, he looked around. He was back at the gas station. The sun was just beginning to rise, and the birds were chirping. Robert couldn't believe what had just happened. He had seen a monster, and he had barely escaped with his life. He knew that he would never forget what had happened to him. He would never be alone again. Robert continued to work the late shift at the gas station, but he was never the same. He was always on edge, and he never felt safe alone. He would often hear strange noises in the night, and he would see shadows out of the corner of his eye. One night, Robert was working late when he heard a loud crash from the back room. He grabbed a flashlight and slowly approached the sound. As he opened the door to the back room, he was met with a sight that would haunt him forever. The monster was standing there in the middle of the room. Its eyes were glowing red, and its mouth was curled into a wicked grin. Robert screamed and ran, but it was too late. The monster grabbed him and dragged him back into the darkness. Robert was never seen again. The gas station was closed down a few weeks later, and the abandoned house was demolished. But the legend of the monster lived on. Robert Moore became a cautionary tale, a reminder that there are things in the darkness that we should never fear. The events of that night left a deep scar on Robert's psyche. He became a recluse, withdrawing from society and living in fear of the monster that had taken his life. He was haunted by the memory of its glowing red eyes and its wicked grin. Robert never forgot what had happened to him. He would often tell his story to anyone who would listen, warning them of the dangers that lurked in the darkness. But no one ever believed him. They thought he was crazy. Robert died alone, his story untold. But the legend of the monster lived on. And every night, in the abandoned gas station in San Jose, the monster would wait for its next victim. Story number 3. The pungent aroma of freshly baked dough and bubbling cheese filled the air, mingling with the faint tang of tomato sauce and oregano. Charles Martin, a seasoned pizza chef with a passion for his craft, stood alone amidst the stainless steel appliances and towering ovens of Slice of Chicago, a humble pizza joint tucked away in the bustling heart of the city. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, casting long, eerie shadows across the deserted dining area. Charles, a man of average build with a receding hairline and a perpetual twinkle in his eyes, was accustomed to the late-night solitude. He relished the quiet moments, the rhythmic dance of kneading dough, tossing pizza bases and layering toppings, a symphony of culinary creation. As the city outside slumbered, Charles found solace in the warmth of his kitchen, the ovens glowing like watchful sentinels. But tonight, the usual tranquility was shattered by an unsettling sense of unease. A chill crept up Charles's spine, a shiver that had nothing to do with the cold air seeping through the aging windows. It was as if an invisible presence had settled over the pizza shop, a malevolent entity lurking in the shadows. Charles, a man not easily spooked, dismissed his initial apprehension as mere fatigue. He continued his work, his hands moving instinctively, shaping dough into perfect circles, his fingers expertly spreading sauce and scattering toppings. The aroma of baking pizza filled the air, a comforting scent that belied the growing dread within Charles's heart. A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, causing the overhead lights to flicker ominously. Charles paused, his gaze drawn to the darkened corners of the shop. The shadows seemed to writhe and dance, taking on grotesque shapes that played tricks on his mind. A low moan echoed through the empty dining area, a sound that sent a jolt of fear coursing through Charles's veins. His heart pounding in his chest, Charles gripped the handle of his pizza cutter, his eyes darting around the room. He was alone, yet he felt a palpable sense of being watched, an unseen presence that was growing bolder with each passing moment. The air grew thick with a heavy, oppressive energy, as if the very walls were closing in on him. Unable to shake the feeling of dread, Charles decided to close up shop early. He quickly boxed up the remaining pizzas, his hands trembling as he stacked them neatly on a shelf. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards beneath his feet. As he reached for the light switch, a sudden gust of wind slammed the door shut, plunging the shop into darkness. Charles fumbled for his phone, his fingers slick with cold sweat. The screen flickered to life, casting an eerie glow on his face. A figure emerged from the shadows, tall and gaunt, its face obscured by the darkness. Charles's breath caught in his throat, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. The figure moved with an unnatural grace, gliding across the room like a phantom. Charles's mind raced, desperately trying to grasp the situation. Was this a figment of his imagination, a product of his fear and exhaustion? Or was there something more sinister at play, a malevolent entity that had taken up residence in his beloved pizza shop? The figure raised a hand, revealing a long, skeletal finger pointed directly at Charles. A wave of icy cold washed over him, and a primal terror gripped his heart. He knew in that instant that he was not alone, that he was trapped in a nightmare with no escape. Charles let out a strangled cry as the figure lunged towards him, its eyes glowing with an eerie luminescence. The phone slipped from his grasp, shattering against the floor, its light extinguished, leaving him in utter darkness. The last thing Charles saw was the figure's contorted face, a mask of pure evil, before everything went black. Our 3 horror stories are over. Thank you for watching my video about 3 true alone at work horror stories. I hope you enjoyed them. If you did, please like and subscribe to my channel for more scary content. And be sure to hit the notification bell so you never miss a video. I'll see you next time.